Well, good morning. I do have a great appreciation for the country we live in. It has its problems, but it's a country like no other in its liberties, its freedoms, and what it affords to its citizens, and I appreciate that. Last Sunday, I announced that we would have a message this morning on the challenges of freedom, and it's something which I think concerns all of us. We enjoy the freedoms of this country, which are so rich, and yet we find as we look into freedom and liberty that there are challenges that go with it in order for us to retain those liberties, those freedoms. And so I want to read to you a scripture that's been on my mind for several weeks and hope that it will be a blessing to you. It's found over in Galatians, the 5th chapter, starting at the 13th verse. The Apostle Paul is writing. He says, "For, brethren, ye have been called unto liberty. Only use not liberty for an occasion to the flesh, but by love serve one another. For all the law is fulfilled in one word, even in this, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. But if you bite and devour one another, take heed that you be not consumed one of another. This I say then, walk in the Spirit, and ye shall not fulfill the lust of the flesh. For the flesh lusteth against the Spirit, and the Spirit against the flesh, and these are contrary the one to the other, so that ye cannot do the things that you would." I like this phrase very much where the Apostle Paul said, "You have been called unto liberty." This is a divine call. This wasn't a call from a certain person, but it was the call of God to liberty. And the Apostle Paul was addressing here some of the problems that had been caused by the Pharisees and others who would corrupt the law of grace and to impose upon them their own laws. And the Apostle Paul was saying that you need to walk in the Spirit. You need to walk in what God has called you into, and by doing this, you will have liberty. You will have the blessings of God upon your life. To walk in the freedom that God has called us in is to walk with clarity of purpose. It is to walk in happiness, in peace, and it is to have the blessings of God upon our life. It reminds me of the second paragraph of the Declaration of Independence, where the writer said, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." Did you know that governments do not give us rights? Those rights come from God. The Apostle Paul said, you have a calling, and it's a calling from God. In the country that we enjoy so much liberty in, those rights are unalienable. They are given to us by God. Government is for the purpose of protecting those rights, to keep those rights from being imposed upon, and to make sure that we all can have happiness, liberty, and life. The Declaration of Independence goes on to say that when any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the rights of the people to alter or abolish it. That was pretty clear. In other words, government doesn't give you those rights. God gives you those rights. And when government gets to the place that it's not protecting those rights, but it is stepping in between the right that God has given us and our rights, then the Declaration of Independence says it's time to make changes. When politicians lose sight of the fact that God gives the people rights and not them, legislation becomes burdensome, restrictive. Taxes are increased to fund special projects, pet projects, and their campaign coffers become engorged, and they are out for just themselves and their own purposes rather than the purpose of protecting the rights of the people. We need statesmen like Abraham Lincoln was, who understood his inabilities and who prayed to God for wisdom and strength to protect the rights of people. God has called us unto liberty. We, the people, need to support good government. We need to keep in mind that we are to treat our neighbor as ourselves, and by doing that we'll elect people who will enforce those concepts, and we can continue to enjoy good government. And then the Apostle Paul went on and said, use not liberty for an occasion to the flesh. So we understand from what Paul said that there's two opposing reasons to be free from restraints. One reason is to better yourself. One reason is to walk closer to God, to be able to have that personal relationship with God and to have more of a spiritual understanding of life and the way that we should walk in the Spirit. So one reason that we want to support liberty is so that we can better ourselves in every way. And when it comes down to governments, we need to support liberty for the reason that we can partake of the American dream of bettering ourselves, of being able to go out and to accomplish those things for ourselves that we want to accomplish, and to live that life of fulfillment in government. Or we can use freedom in order to take advantage of the free will that God gave us to pursue after the base things of the flesh. That's another reason that people use liberty, so that they can do the things that they feel that the flesh would dictate to them. When it comes to government, we recognize that better people make better government. The more people within a system who are out to better themselves and to take of liberty for the purpose that it was given is going to make for better government. Because then you begin to understand that better government is for the purpose of protecting those rights, not taking advantage of those rights for self-ambitions and to consume it on the flesh, but to pursue a better way of life. As we look at history, we see a time when there were immigrants which came to this country for the purpose of taking advantage of the American dream. They came here to work hard and to prosper and to take advantage of these liberties so that they could take advantage of working hard and making a way in life. That's the proper use of liberty. That's how you protect liberty. That's the challenge of liberty, is to take advantage of it by bettering yourself, not by taking advantage of it to prosper the fleshly things of life. Let me consider this thought from a different angle. Let's think about nature. We saw the video of the song America the Beautiful. There's something so very special about nature. And when you get out into nature by yourself, don't you feel closer to God? Isn't there something there that you begin to see the vastness, the beauty of this great land that God created. There's something about nature which brings us closer to God. Dictionary.com gives this definition of nature: the material world, especially as surrounding humankind and existing independently of human activities. In other words, nature is something which exists independent of anything that man does. As Christians by faith, we understand and know that nature was created by God. And I like to think in my mind that nature is the nature of God. It is big, vast, wonderful, beautiful, and far beyond what the human mind can comprehend. To me, that's just the nature of God that He has given to us. We see a little bit of God in nature. That's Him. That's what He has created. Just as God created a physical world with nature, God created a human soul in the beginning of time. And within that soul, He put His nature. In Adam and Eve, they had the nature of God within them. And sin came in between them and God, and it somewhat marred that nature. And it gave them that free will that if they wanted to, they could, just as we today can turn our desires towards the fleshly desires that are unlike God, that are against the nature of God. But He put something of a natural law, and we can call it the organic law, within the heart of man, so that they understood the precepts and the concept of what God was like. For example, if you look and read through Genesis, you will see that the patriarchs were offering sacrifices to God, even though there wasn't a statutory law that said you have to offer sacrifices. That is the nature of God within them, that they realized that they needed to give obeisance to God and they needed to worship Him. God put it in the heart of man, that natural aspect of Him. Now, I don't know what your emotional feelings might be concerning wolves. Some of you may think they're cute and cuddly. Others may think they're rather vicious and mean. But back in 1872, Yellowstone was designated as a national park. And there were quite a few gray wolves within the confines of what they designate as the national park. And in order to bring tourists in and all, they figured we need to get rid of the wolves. So they started killing them out. And by wolves that had been killed, they pretty much decimated the wolf from the area of Yellowstone National Park. What happened was elk began to populate. And they began to take over the ecosystem, and they began to tear up the national park. And the authorities realized we made a mistake. We went against Mother Nature here. And so I believe it was 1995, they brought the gray wolf back to Yellowstone, and today there are gray wolves in the national park. Because they understood that whenever you go against Mother Nature, you better be prepared to suffer the consequences. Nature has an ecosystem to it which it balances itself out and it makes things right. In the spiritual world, it's the same way. God has given us freedoms, and He has put His nature within our hearts. And when we begin to go against the nature or the laws of God that have been put within our heart, we better be prepared to take the consequences of that, because there are certain things which will happen. I want to go over to Romans, the first chapter, and read starting at the 25th verse. It says, who changed the truth of God into a lie, and worship and serve the creature more than the Creator. Doesn't that remind you what Paul wrote in Galatians? He said you can use freedom to better yourself, to follow the natural things that God has put within the heart, or you can turn towards the fleshly things. You can turn more towards the creation than you do the Creator. You have that choosing. But it says, for this cause. Now here's the consequences. God gave them up unto vile affections, for even their women did change the natural use into that which is against nature. And likewise also the men, leaving the natural use of the woman, burned in their lust one toward another, men with men working that which is unseemly, and receiving in themselves that recompense of their error which was meet. Here we find that when they went against the natural law that God put within the heart, there were consequences to be paid. The Supreme Court this past week ruled that 2 men or 2 women could get married if they wanted to. That has consequences. That takes away the liberties and the freedoms of others. Family life will suffer. It will affect our government. Before I mentioned that good people make for good government. When you begin to have a population within a society that turns more towards the fleshly aspect and choose rather to do those things than to pursue those things that will better themselves, you are going to see that the government that is elected will be a restrictive government, and freedoms will be lost because of it. Let me go back to Galatians, to our text, and pick up here another phrase in the 14th verse. For all the law is fulfilled in one word, even in this, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. I want everyone to pursue that path which would better themselves. I want everybody. I do not want to suffer the consequences of turning to the flesh. I don't want to suffer going against the natural laws that God put in the heart. God put a natural law within the heart that marriage was a one woman and one man. I don't want to go against those laws that God put in the heart. That was from the beginning. And we all know in the natural heart, the natural Spirit of God, what truth is. But if we go against it and turns towards the flesh, he gives us up unto a reprobate mind, a mind that is just totally focused upon the fleshly aspect of the world. And this is where there are consequences. I want the liberty of Christ in my heart. I want to have a clear vision, a clear focus, and I want my neighbor to have that too. I want them also to know the blessings of liberty. I want them to know the blessings of God in their life and what it's like to follow God and to know his blessings, his grace within their heart. But if you bite and devour one another, take heed that you be not consumed one of the other. I think we kind of see that being played out in some aspects today. Whenever you find people going against the natural Spirit of God in their heart, the laws of God, you're going to see restrictions being placed. Riots. Whenever there's a riot in our country, there are curfews. There are restrictions that are imposed in order to put down the riot. There are gun control laws that are talked about. You have to have laws to control a society that is going after the fleshly things of life. The Apostle Paul said how much better it is if we walk in the Spirit and enjoy the freedoms of the Spirit of God. I love God this morning. I love this country, and I appreciate the opportunities that it has given me and my family. And I want succeeding generations to know those liberties too. I want them to know of how to prosper, how to better themselves, and to enjoy more of liberty and not an oppressive government. May God help us all. Amen.